Ariana, are you there?
Hi everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us today for our Why You Need to Perform a Cyber Risk Assessment webinar. We are excited to take an in-depth look at the key elements of performing a successful cybersecurity risk assessment and discussing why they are essential to your cybersecurity strategy. So we are going to start off by telling you a little bit about the company hosting today's webinar. Mohan, if you want to go to the next slide. Perfect. So RSI Security is actually headquartered in San Diego, California. We have sales offices in Portland and LA. We are a managed IT security, so a managed security service provider, along with compliance advisory service providers. So we help companies get compliant with a variety of frameworks, including PCI, NIST, HIPAA, HITRUST, etc. We have around 50 employees and over 400 consultants. We were founded in 2008. We have a variety of certifications, including HITRUST. We also are a PCI QSA and ASV company, and we're experts at guiding HITRUST, HIPAA, PCI, and all those other ones. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Mohan. Oh yeah, okay, sorry. So along with our certifications, you can see that we have a variety of other certifications along with PCI and HITRUST, the CISA, the CISM, PMP. So our team is very well equipped and knowledgeable in guiding cybersecurity consultations. So a little bit about Mohan Shamachar, our speaker for today's webinar. Mohan is our senior security advisor and assessor at RSI Security. He has 15 years of experience in information technology infrastructure, management, and cybersecurity. He's worked in the banking, healthcare, and energy sectors. Mohan is both an authorized high trust CSF assessor and a PCI DSS qualified security assessor, or QSA. Mohan's recent accomplishments include successful completion of NERC SIP program management, numerous level 1 PCI and HIPAA assessments and audits. And all of that is to say that Mohan is a very qualified individual to address cyber risk assessments in today's presentation. So without further ado, I will pass it off to you, Mohan.
Thank you, Ariana. Everybody, welcome. Thanks for attending our webinar today. Let's start with some social engineering. I would like some information from all of you. So Ariana, can we start with the one word?
Yes, so for this first one, we'll actually have you guys all chat one word on your mind for this webinar. So you can use the chat function at the bottom of your screen. And we just kind of want to know what you're thinking about going into this webinar. So we see some answers coming in: liability, risk, compliance, confusion. Awesome, these are great. PCI, compliance, bacon. Compliance, risk, so a lot of compliance. Risk and compliance. Attack surface management, assessing. Learn what risks are, knowledge. These are all great. Assessment, compliance. All right, so we're getting a feel for what's on everyone's mind.
All right, thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Yes, so as many of you, have compliance and risk, and what is assessment, what is risk, and management actions, and so on. So hopefully this webinar will address your expectations today. Thank you. All right, so let's start with reading some news, what's going on these days, so that that provides a background and a little bit of a context to the webinar and the risk management. So some time back, not so old news, but recently, NSA started sharing their vulnerability flaws that they find in different systems, particularly Microsoft. And they never used to share this information before. So there was sort of a controversy about why is NSA not sharing. So now NSA shares these things with Microsoft so that Microsoft can provide a timely alert to all the businesses, and they can do the patching and so on. So that's that's a change. And then, as you can see, this is going to be the norm, in the future, where the regulatory bodies will start asking the businesses to provide cyber resilience reports. How are you doing with your risk management? How's your posture? So, these reports are not going to be just internal anymore. So this is sort of a trend that the governments have started asking for companies level of risk posture and so on. And then we all talk about driverless cars, autonomous vehicles, and Internet of Things, and so on. So that's where the e-mobility comes in. And so here's a Financial Times snippet that talks about how it's becoming a target for attacks and so on. So it's a very, very important issue when it comes to safety of everybody. So another big concern is, in just less than 100 days, we have our elections coming up. So we have already seen, in the news in the last elections as to how things were, things got out of hand, and there was some influence and so on. Different actors staging different attacks. So this is another concern. We have voting by phone and COVID and everything. So this is just one international news where oil infrastructure is at risk. Not big attacks, but smaller attacks that can cause big disruptions. So we all read about artificial intelligence, getting into our lives in different ways, and particularly healthcare. As you can see here, there are warnings about how scientists are worried that, by just changing some data and changing, what the infrastructure of the artificial intelligence for healthcare, you can get really adverse effects. Your diagnosis may change, your treatment may change, things like that. That's pretty scary. And then just a few days ago, right? Probably is it a week ago or something? So you all know that Twitter got hacked. Somebody started asking for Bitcoins under some big names like Joe Biden, Obama, and Bill Gates, and so on. So how can we not talk about COVID and coronavirus today when I'm presenting the webinar from home and working from home, and particularly seniors are at risk. This is another risk management issue where, okay, you're a senior. How do you calculate your risk right now? Can you go out or not? Can you, go to a restaurant or not? Can you go to the beach or not? Should you wear a mask or not? So all kinds of questions. So with that, let's understand what is a risk. So starting with some basic, Oxford English Dictionary definition, a risk is a possibility of loss, something that is unwelcome. Although, risk management do talk about positive risk and something that's not necessarily negative. But in general, when we talk about risk, we are like, oh, no, I'm not ready for this. All right, what happens if my business is attacked? So we always thinking about a negative situation. So it's just a chance of happening, or the possibility of such an adverse outcome is called the risk. And to be more precise, a risk is something that we kind of know, and we are in a position to manage it and measure it. Uncertainty, on the other hand, we don't know, and we have no clue, and we are not ready for that, and it's unmanageable. It's something outside of our controls. So that's the, hopefully it'll give you what exactly is risk, and why do we say risk management and not uncertainty management? Because uncertainty is one of those things, that we cannot do anything about. But risk, we can do something about. So now, another polling question for you. How many of you think whether COVID-19 is a risk or whether it's an uncertainty? Awesome. Thank you. So yes, I see that, just as I thought, it's almost 50-50 where COVID-19, Bill Gates used to say it, many, many years ago, and governments were kind of talking about it. They had, set aside budget for pandemics and so on. So the expectation of a pandemic was there. It's not like it was completely out of the blue. In business schools were talking about it, healthcare companies were talking about it, hospitals were talking about it, governments were talking about it. So there was an expectation of, yes, if it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. So that is the case with COVID-19. And although it came almost like an out of the blue, it is a sort of a risk. So the both answers are correct here. So it is a sort of a risk where, it is there is a way to manage it, at least theoretically. Some governments have done a good job, some not. They had a playbook, and some did not. So there are various reasons for that. And so yes, with a good playbook, we can manage such a pandemic. It's a large-scale risk. It's huge, but still, it is a management problem. So both answers are correct. Thank you so much for this input. All right, so let's move on. Now, we talked about, sort of a negative consequence. Probably you remember this ad. Let's watch it.
Facing a virtual reality? UPS can help you plan for it, manage it, and deal with it. We deliver more e-shipments than anyone. UPS, moving at the speed of business.
So there is the, too much of a good thing. So that is also a risk that the companies need to be prepared. So that's an example there. So we're learning about, how to understand what a risk is. And here's a clipping from Harvard Business School. What is a total firm risk? It consists of multiple types of risk. We're talking about operational risk, machines breaking down, systems breaking down, product market risk, losing the customers to the competition, increase in competition, financial risk. We also what happened in 2008, and legal risks, regulatory risks. To the heart of all the cybersecurity experts here and managers, regulatory risk is on their mind. And so as you can see, there are all kinds of risks. Every risk, there is a prefix for almost different kinds of risks. We can talk about cyber risk, security risk. So, it's important to understand that, yes, for example, security risk will contribute somehow to the total firm risk. So there are, subcategories and then so on. So it's just an example list of the types of risk here. All right, I got one more fun activity here. So we talked about, what a risk looks like, and it's manageable, and you can do something about it. And there are things that you cannot do something about it. That's uncertainty. Now let's see an example here. We have a theater performance tonight, and there are a few risks that have been identified, and as management, we have to respond to those risks. So let's launch the question to see, what do you think of this? Awesome. So I see a clear trend here. Many of you think that power cut and the non-availability of a key actor are clearly the risks, whereas some of you think that local school event is also a risk. Yes, it's a possibility that someone who was planning on coming to the show may not come to the show because of the school event, because it's a priority. But in general, yes, the show will have some audience, definitely, but power cut and making sure that the actor is available are a priority, high risk for the show. And when it comes to risk response, many of you think that, yes, for power cut, we have to have a backup generator. If the actor is missing, we will have an understudy or a backup actor. So those two will mitigate or reduce the impact of the top two risks. Whereas canceling tonight's performance, if no one shows up, or if the possibility of no one showing up, then yes, that's a choice. But the probability of at least half the crowd, half the tickets that were sold will show up is probably the case. So I guess we can continue with the show tonight. So that's a typical scenario where you identify the risk, you identify the impact. If no one shows up, what's the impact on the show? What's the loss, and what can we do about it? So prudently, we can address the top two risks and still get the show going. So just an example of how businesses also perform risk management when dealing with risks. So a quick look at global risk report. What do people think about for the next 10 years? As you can see, the weather-related risks or the likelihood of becoming reality, the extreme weather conditions are high. And then you can see cyber attacks in the list, data fraud or theft in the list. And they're also talking about the impact of all these threats becoming reality. As you can see, yes, information infrastructure breakdown, cyber attacks, infectious diseases still is part of the list. So this, you can see how globally people are thinking about, what the long-term risk outlook looks like. So slowly we are, we're going to go into the context of cybersecurity here. So what are the top cyber threats, at least as of 2020? I know we kind of lost 2020 because of COVID, but this is what was predicted. Elections, of course, is on everyone's mind. And 5G is here, whether we like it or not, it will be deployed. And 5G has huge consequences and similar. Now, the question is 5G an opportunity or a bad threat? It depends how we manage it, how we deal with it. And of course, any technological advance, it should be taken as an opportunity. And then you have, new types of ransomware where, the things that we have not seen yet may be arriving to our computers. And then, some of you may know the deep fake social engineering, where, people are, you can simulate using artificial intelligence. You can really simulate a person, overlay a famous person such as Bill Gates or whoever onto another one and broadcast. Have the, people will believe that it's Bill Gates talking, or it's a famous personality talking, it's an influencer talking, whereas it's not. So that's a big threat there. Talk about impersonation and imposters and so on. And then another social engineering called phishing, which is the voice phishing, where you get calls, saying, I would like to make sure that you're okay, so I need some information here. These calls are not strange, but it's increasingly becoming threats. For example, you get a phone call from your bank. How do you know that it's your bank calling you? So that's important to think about. And then finally, to our context here, the compliance risks. Every few months, we are talking about a new regulation or change in regulation, and California Privacy Act is changing. It's going to the ballot in November. So CCPA itself is going to have a second version, and GDPR is getting stronger, and multiple states are going to enact their own laws, perhaps a federal law. These are all scenarios of uncertainty and to an extent risk scenarios where companies have to be prepared, and so on. So 2008 crisis brought a lot of regulations. COVID might result in a lot of other kinds of regulations. So there you go. So this is how the cyber threat landscape looks like. Okay, so hopefully this is the final one, or maybe there's one more. So how many of you perform risk assessments at your companies these days? All right, thank you. So that's where I'm so glad to see this result here. About 67% of you do conduct risk assessments, and for those who are not doing it, it's not too late. So I'm an auditor, assessor. I audit different organizations. So for different industries, my very first question is, do you do risk assessments? So, we at RSI, we don't just go by, okay, let's start with requirement 1. That's not how it is. Yes, compliance is important, but even more important is how a business approaches the security posture, how a business approaches in protecting the data and protecting the systems. So we focus on, the true results of cybersecurity, and that's why this question, and I'm so glad to see these results. Thank you. All right, so now why, you may ask, okay, why should we do it? And why are you asking us about risk assessment? It's not just RSI's desire to ask you a question, but it's part of the requirement. If you guys are doing, if you want to become PCI DSS compliant, PCI compliant, and dealing with credit card data, as you know, 12.2 says you got to implement a risk assessment process, which means you have to have a process, you have to have a risk assessment report, and that should say, okay, what are your high risks and what are you doing about it? And if you are doing HIPAA assessments, the HIPAA security rule says conduct an accurate and thorough assessment of the potential risks and vulnerabilities to the CIA of electronic EPHI. There you go. And GDPR, it comes in 2 different forms, not only at the security, but you also have to do a privacy impact assessment, which is also a similar process of conducting the risk assessment. So there you go. So if GDPR has it, guess what? The next Privacy Act from California is 93% GDPR. Although currently they do talk about risk management and risk assessment, and GLBA and FISMA, Massachusetts, and so on and so forth. So risk assessment is part of most of the standards that are out there. So it's not only it's important to conduct the risk assessment, it's also for the compliance. It's a violation if you don't do it. All right, so now let's go to some of the in-depth as to, okay, we know that we have to do risk assessment. We know what a risk is. So how do we go about managing the risk? How do we go about determining the risk, evaluating the risk, and putting some structure behind it? So as this diagram shows, you have threats, which you cannot do anything about. There is no, you can't say that, oh, please don't attack my systems. So the threat actors will always be there. It's completely out of your control, such as malicious code, unauthorized access, DDoS, and accidents, internal, external threats, disgruntled employees, whatever it is. So you can't stop the threats. Threats are always there, and that's where it all starts. And now the question is, how successful can those malicious actors can be? That depends on your security posture and how you manage your business systems and what is the security culture at your organizations. So we term those as vulnerabilities. Okay, so if you have unprotected systems, obviously the exploitation can happen. So systems without antivirus, yes, there is a big risk of the malicious code landing on your computers. So it takes a two to tango here: the threat and your lack of readiness, and together, and the likelihood. For example, a threat actor may say, I'm not going to go after this business because there is not much money for me here. So, threat actors want some return on investment. So they don't want to invest time on something that they don't get back. So they do attack the high value organizations. Medical data is selling hot there. PII has a high value, and so on. So with the likelihood of a threat becoming a reality to an organization, that forms the real risk. So in general, the risk model it's a function of the threat and the likelihood of the threat actor acting on the threat, and then the readiness of an organization, and then finally the most important thing is, what is the impact? What is the impact if the threat becomes a reality, if the systems are exploited? So this is how we determine a risk. Let's look in to more details here. So as I said, this is from NIST 830, which is a great guide to risk assessment. It's freely available. Just go to NIST.gov. And as you can see, this is the general process of performing the assessment. You identify the threats, identify your vulnerabilities, determine the likelihood of occurrence, and determine the impact. What's the loss? Is it financial loss, reputational loss, data loss? What's the liability here, right? So you think of what's the impact, and then you evaluate the risk. And let's see how we can record it and how we can use it. So here's an example where, let's say the threat scale is high. So this is a qualitative risk evaluation example. There are two types, qualitative and quantitative. So quantitative talks about in numbers, everything is in numbers, whereas qualitative, you organize the risk in terms of, okay, low risk, moderate risk, high risk, very high risk, and so on. So let's say there's a threat which is of very high importance, such as targeted DDoS and huge data spills and disclosures like EPHI and so on. And let's say the organization's vulnerability scale, depending on the security controls that are in place and the security awareness in place. So let's say it's mod, right? And now together, the overall likelihood is mod, right? Let's say this happens, 10 times a year. Somewhat likely. That's why it's mod, right? So now, what is the impact of the threat becoming a reality, which means the spill becoming, the data spill happening, disclosures happening, the impact is pretty high. And it has effect on operations, assets, individuals, lawsuits, and so on, right? So the impact is pretty high, even though the likelihood is moderate. So now, what is our overall risk level, right? So we say it's moderate based on this little lookup table here, right? You have the level of impact, and then you have the likelihood. So a very high impact and a very high likelihood obviously results in very high risk. And then in our example here, it's a moderate, high impact, but moderate likelihood. And so that results in a moderate risk classification. So this is a, sorry, let me go back here. Okay. Okay, so this is an example of how qualitatively you can identify a threat, identify your vulnerabilities, identify the likelihood, and then identify your impact, and then arrive at what the risk level is. So here's another way to record what we just did. Here's an example of a low risk. The threat is unauthorized software, and the vulnerabilities are, for people can download a software for personal use, but there is a possibility that the software may come with embedded malicious code. And then what are the consequences, right? You have licensing issues, malicious code, hijacking the workstation, and possible disclosure, and so on. And what are some examples of countermeasures you can take? Make sure that you have strict policies and standards and procedures. Make sure that configuration management takes care of it. Make sure that you have a very good security culture. You provide awareness and updates, and ensure antivirus on the system. And then make sure that not everybody can install software willy-nilly, right? Perform access rights, and make sure, and also whitelist, and also tell these are the authorized software, these are not, and so on, right? So there are multiple ways you can take countermeasures on this. So this is a typical risk prioritization example, and in this particular example, it's a low risk. So here's a risk register. So this is the best tool your organization can maintain. This needs to be updated at all times. This needs to be published. Everybody should know it. A risk owner should be there. So as you can see, risks are categorized, identified, and probability is attached. Impact scoring is done. Risk scoring is done. Risk ranking is done. And then your actions. So what action are you going to take for these risks? So according to the risk ranking, so high risk obviously needs immediate attention, and low risks, over a period of time, you address them. And then the risk owner, the ownership is very important. So here's an example for you. You can maintain this in any of your repositories, like starting with a spreadsheet or a sophisticated software and so on, right? So this is how. So we learned about what is risk, how we determine it, and how we are going to record it, and what are some of the tools we can use. And there are other, risk assessment can be very manual, very, simple, to very complex. If you have to do a very sophisticated quantitative analysis, numbers-based, you do need some kind of a tool. And some of you may have heard about FAIR Institute, Factor Analysis of Information Risk. They are well known for quantitative analysis, very prescriptive. There is no flexibility for customizing your risk assessment method. Training is required to understand how to do this. And then, it's suitable for organizations having really high impact risk, large scale, where they have a sophisticated risk management strategies and systems, and they need this kind of a tool. And obviously, initially, it takes a lot of time to set up. And once you set up, it's pretty quick. And then, as we talked about in the previous slides, NIST 830 is a great guide. It's a qualitative method. It's not very prescriptive. It's suitable for most organizations, it's quick to do as well. And then we have the Carnegie Mellon University's Octave. It's pretty broad and very, engineering analysts look for these things. They find it a little more easier to do it, and lots of spreadsheets. It's easy to quick to start, but it takes longer to perform the risk assessment using Octave. So a few choices here as to, okay, how do I go about doing the risk assessment? So this is, just a decision flow around risk management. Okay, we are engineers, we are IT, we have business process owners, we have data owners, and we have the senior management and the executives. So how do they all interact here? This is, I borrowed from NIST CSF. This is part of the NIST CSF, where the risk decisions are taken at the executive level, and the risk management strategies are drafted by the business process owners, and then we have the implementation operations team who make things happen. They secure the critical infrastructure. And as you can see, this is not a one-time thing. This is a continuous process. I'll go into some of the best practices later. So you can think of it this way. This is a good time to go to the next slide. All right. So another question that's important is, how does the risk management tie into with the security program? So as you can see an example here, a company that implements all of the controls, 100%, everything, buy all the tools, right? They end up spending $14 million, whereas pounds, euros. And an example here is, this is from McKinsey, risk-based approach. Once you identify your priorities, risk ranking, your high, the things that need the most attention. If you approach it that way, see the result of how much money you got to spend. So that's a huge savings right there, and the outcome is the same. You have a secure organization. This presents a no-brainer here that organizations must approach cybersecurity with a risk-based program. All right. Here's the list that I was going to present as to, okay, some of the takeaways, right? So what's the best way to use risk management? What's the best approach to arrive at a good cybersecurity program? So it all starts with the senior management support, having an effective risk management team, a team that consists of business process owners, IT teams, information security, senior management, HR. So all the important stakeholders need to be part of the risk management team. Everybody has input and valuable information that should go into the risk management and risk assessment. So with that, that obviously brings senior management support. And then understanding the business objectives. Okay, what are the important functions here? What are the important assets? If things do go down, which one should be brought up first? Obviously, some of the things you already deal with is disaster recovery and business continuity process, where you identify your critical functions and assets and have procedures how to bring it back if things things do happen. So similarly, without the understanding of the business objectives and understanding the scope, it's hard to perform risk management. So that's the next big action that organizations should do, understand the scope. And once you know the important areas in your business, then you can identify, okay, let's now go to the next level. What locations? Is it on-prem, cloud, different clinics, different places, within the organizations, what departments, which buildings, all right? So multiple locations and assets and people and process and technologies, right? So you kind of identifying all the important areas here. And that's the next important step. Now with all this, with the scope and with your understanding and identifying your assets and identifying your technologies and security controls, what do you do with it? Now you can create a risk profile saying, okay, as of today, this is how my posture looks like. As of today, my incident response is great, but patch management is not so great. As of today, my antivirus management is great, but my firewall review process is not great. So you kind of identify all the different domains and say, this is my risk profile. At this time, I am, very vulnerable. Our business needs to do a lot of improvements, or maybe on the other spectrum, we are doing quite well here. So let's monitor. Let's continue what we are doing. Maybe go one level higher to the maturity, and so on. So it's a broad spectrum of what a posture looks like for different organizations. So you can use the risk assessment and risk management process to arrive at your current risk profile. And then having known your current posture, having known your existing controls, now you perform a risk assessment. Now you know, okay, these are my high areas, these are my low areas, these are my moderate areas, these things need mitigation. These things should be done within 1 week, 1 month, 3 months, and these things can carry on for a year, without any impact. So with the current posture, you perform the risk assessment, know the impact, and you rank the risks. Now you got a destination to go to, which is, okay, now that I have identified my posture, my risk profile, and the risk rankings, and one more important thing, what is the acceptable level of the risk? For acceptable level for different organizations are different. So that determines the risk mitigation strategy in the next few steps. So once you have your risk assessment and risk ranking, now you identify, okay, what am I going to do about this risk? Am I going to reduce it, minimize it? I'm going to put more money in it. I'm going to put additional controls in it, or am I going to give more security awareness? So how am I going to reduce this risk? That is one strategy. And then let's say, no, I'm going to buy an insurance. It'll take care of it, even if it happens. If I'm going to lose, if it's a financial loss, if I insure it, that's fine. So I'm transferring my financial risk to an insurer. So that's another strategy. And transferring some of the data management to third parties is an example of sharing and transferring the risk. And then ensuring that the third party is compliant and not storing the data in your organization. So that's another strategy. And then finally, risk acceptance. No, this is not such a huge impact. And at the same time, if I try to minimize or reduce, I'm going to be spending more money. It's not worth it, right? So that risk acceptance depends on the risk appetite or the risk tolerance of an organization. So, but having accepted the risk, are you going to forget about it? No, that's where you do the monitoring, right? Yes, I have accepted this risk. Today it's low. Tomorrow it may become high, right? So you go into the monitoring. So we talked about risk treatment strategies. Now, having identified what you're going to do about the risk, now you have a task for creating the future posture. Okay, a year from now, 3 months from now, 6 months from now, I need to put in these controls. these are my weaknesses, vulnerabilities, these are my strengths, and this is where all the attention should go, this is where all the budget should be assigned. So it's a risk-based management decision to create a cybersecurity program. And so, as you can see, these 7 steps, get you to where you want to be without having to worry about, or do I need 200 controls? Do I need to do all CIS top 20, one by one? Do I have to go all NIST 853? Oh my God, there's all kinds of levels here. So some of you had a word in mind in the beginning, confusion, right? So hopefully this provides you some clarity as to how to go about creating a cybersecurity program based on risk assessment and risk management. And lastly, as I continue to keep saying, monitor. So it's not a one-time activity. This is a risk management decision flow. It's a continuous activity. Make sure that your senior management supports it, and everybody is involved, and keep the continuous improvements. Watch the changes to the systems. Monitor the changes to the compliance requirements. Monitor the changes to the threat landscape. The threat analysis and monitoring threats should be part of the business as usual for every organization out there trying to protect the data, trying to protect the assets, and other things. So I believe that organizations keeping this process in place will have a great security posture. All right, Ariana.
Yes, thank you so much, Mohan, for your presentation. Before we get to the questions and answer portion of our webinar, we just wanted to go over a few resources that we'll be emailing you out tomorrow. So we will be emailing you this presentation deck along with 1 CPE credit certificate PDF for your attendance and participation. We'll also send you a link to request a consultation if there's any further questions that you have regarding a risk assessment. We would love to chat with you about how we might be able to help you out and get one conducted for your company. And then we also are giving an offer to get a free cyber risk report. So it's a pretty basic report, but it's pretty eye-opening and interesting. So we definitely encourage you, if you are one of those people who aren't conducting risk assessments or are not sure, you can sign up for this offer and get a preliminary report of some of the vulnerabilities that your company may be facing now. So we are going to go into the question and answer portion of our webinar. It looks like we're a little short on time, but there's 4 questions. If there's any others, feel free to add them there, and any that Mohan doesn't get to, we can address in tomorrow's email. So I'll pass it back to you, Mohan. Mohan, are you there?
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. Thank you, Ariana. So let's address one of these questions here. When assessing assets, how do you separate the system from the data risk? So it appears like we are talking about system risks versus data risks. So I can provide a context here. When we talk about data risk, yes, you're talking about PII, EPHI, credit card data, and so on and so forth. So the risk of data loss or unauthorized access to the data, right? So data is the heart of the cybersecurity program, and you would have performed your data mapping, you would have understood your data locations, and so on. So, to see the risk to the data is to see the risk to the assets. Assets containing the data, or it could be multiple different types of assets, and so it depends in depth, right? You look at it from a layered perspective, right? And so classification is important when it comes to data. You have your protected data, restricted data, confidential data, internal data, public data, right? So without a data classification, it's going to be hard to have a security program. You should know where is your most important data resides and who can access it and how. So the threats to the data, if you classify and if you understand in the scope of it, now you can understand, okay, the threats, yes, there are. Is every threat important to me? Is every threat is going to become a reality to our business? Maybe not, because you have done these things. You have identified your most important data and it's sitting there in the most protective location with most protective controls. You have your prevention controls. You have detection controls and recovery processes, right? So that's how you look at a system risk versus the data risk. Let's see, one more question. Is it the responsibility of the auditor to plan the risk-based audit, or is it auditor's responsibility, or need to just rely on auditor's risk assessment? It is definitely the auditor's responsibility. It's as I mentioned, it should be part of the business as usual procedures and policies that an organization decides, saying, we are going to do a risk assessment. Here's our risk assessment report. Here's our risk ranking. This is what we have done. This is what we need to do. So this gives an auditor a perspective of what a program looks like, what areas to focus on, and in auditing, and so on. So yeah, the one answer is it is the organization's responsibility to perform the risk assessment. Okay, can you explain the risk management decision flows again? So this one I can perhaps, if you can provide your name to Ariana, I can provide that over the email. And how do you calculate residual risk? Residual risk is basically the risk that is acceptable to you. You don't have to do anything about it. So anything that's remaining, in other words, you have accepted a situation as this is fine for our organization. This depends on the risk appetite, risk tolerance, right? So most importantly, should you remove every risk? Should you eliminate the risk? No, that is not the goal of the risk management. The goals of the risk management is to minimize the risk, to minimize the impact of the risk, to minimize the loss, and minimize the the vulnerabilities, right? Improving the security posture, right? So performing the improvements and taking actions and taking and treating the risks, whether it's risk transfer, sharing, risk acceptance, or risk mitigation. So depending on your strategy, you have an acceptable level of risk, and that's the residual risk. All right. So I guess we are kind of out of time. We'll get back, Ernesto. I'll get back to you to your question. So thank you so much, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the webinar, and hopefully this was helpful.